Welcome to the IT Career Energizer podcast. For anyone who wants to build and grow a career in IT, develop and improve your strengths and skills, be inspired and motivated by the successes of others, manage your career progression, and achieve your IT career goals. And now, your host, Phil Burgess.
Welcome to episode 291 of the IT Career Energizer podcast. My guest on today's show is an engineering executive, as well as author of the books The Manager's Path and 97 Things Every Engineering Manager Should Know. She began her career with Microsoft in 2001 as a software design engineer, and by 2014 had been appointed Chief Technology Officer of Runway. She is now the Managing Director of Two Sigma, with responsibility for management and strategy. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Camille Fournier.
Hi, thank you. So excited to be here.
So Camille, can you maybe tell us a little bit about your current role and what you're doing with Two Sigma?
Sure, yeah. I run platform engineering at Two Sigma, sort of my main focus. So platform engineering is really the software infrastructure that we use. So it's things like our compute platforms, that's things like Kubernetes or OpenStack. It's our public cloud, infrastructure. It's our software development tools, build tools, all of our storage tooling as well. I also oversee architecture and have a hand in kind of the reliability engineering side of things. So that's kind of my major focus these days.
Right, that sounds like quite a broad spectrum of responsibility.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is broad and yet focused at the same time. And I actually really enjoy it. You know, platform engineering is the technical space that I've spent the most time in my career in. And so, I really enjoy thinking about those kinds of problems.
Right. So, Camille, can you share with us a career tip, one that the audience may not be aware of and perhaps should be?
So I think one of my favorite career tips, and something that I have to remind myself all the time, is that, certainly if your goal is to grow your career, you're trying to get promoted, you're trying to get more responsibility, the thing you probably need to do is something that you're not comfortable with yet. That you probably need to work on some kind of skill set that is not necessarily the skill set that you've been that has gotten you to where you are right now. Really, like there's a great book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There that I often recommend people read. And really the concept is like, you're going to get to a certain level based on your skills. And to get to the next level, you usually need to develop some underdeveloped skill, or do things a little bit differently, take a different approach, right? That without very few people will continue to rise and rise and rise just developing the existing career the existing career skills that they had that got them to wherever they are. So that's kind of the thing that I tend to advise people is, if you're feeling stuck, particularly, look around and ask yourself, all right, like, what do I need to change? What do I need to do differently? Stop doing, start doing, what about like the actions that I'm taking probably needs to change to get me out of this stuck situation.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So in terms of your own career, you're able to give us maybe an example of what took you from where you started into, higher up and towards a CTO position?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have had to, I've had to change lots and lots of things, throughout my career to kind of get to where I am now. I mean, one of the major changes that anyone who goes from being a hands-on, computer software developer to becoming a manager, which is a common transition for many people, is you have to stop writing code all the time and have to sort of get away from being the person who knows everything about the software because you developed it or worked on it or read it or reviewed it or whatever, right? And that was a big, that was a very hard transition for me because I really did enjoy I'd gotten really good at writing software and building systems, and I really enjoyed that process. And when I got to the point where I was just unable to do a good job of being a manager and a leader and also write software, that was a very hard transition for me. So that's certainly one of the memorable things that I really had to change, to get ahead. I've had to change, but that's just like one of many, right? I think, learning how to put your ego at the door, even when you think you know everything about a subject, and, listen to other people's perspectives better. That is a skill that, I have had to constantly remind myself, frankly, to work on, even to this day, because, um, you're so used to, I think, as sometimes as an engineer, when you start out, there's really a career of like, proving that you know stuff. There's a lot of like, sort of, I know all the details and therefore I should be able to like make the decision. And when you're working in systems, sometimes at least that's true, right? That there really can be a right answer. But as systems get more complicated, as you're, becoming a manager and working with people, and you're dealing with lots of different kinds of trade-offs, whether they're system trade-offs or people trade-offs or business trade-offs, nobody really does know the answer. There isn't an answer. There are, spectrums of options that everybody has to choose from. And I think that, one of the things that I've also had to work on and continue to learn is like, an answer, you don't know the answer. And so be sure to stay open-minded and make sure that you're hearing other people, in the process of trying to come to conclusions and make decisions, and don't just assume that you know the best, because you feel strongly about something.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely right. So yes, it's amazing what you can learn when you're open to other ideas, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay. Camille, can you tell us about your worst IT career moment and what you learned from that experience?
Yes. I think, for me, my most memorable worst moment was actually my very first full-time job at Microsoft. Um, and not because Microsoft was a bad place to work, but I came into this team of people that were all pretty experienced engineers. And, I had a hotshot computer science degree, and, I thought I should, look, I had gotten this 4-year degree. It was really hard, right? I worked really hard. I thought I should sort of know what I was doing. I came into like a team that is, looking back, like probably not the kind of team that's really well suited to somebody just out of college. They were working on, the, like compilers for some of the early .NET work. So I was actually working on the Itanium compiler, which is like really, really dates me. Um, and I'm working, and they were also like very close to launching something big. So everybody on the team was really busy. I didn't actually know how to work. I mean, I had internships, but like I didn't know what being in a real job as a software engineer full time really meant. Um, and I was really afraid of asking questions because everybody was busy and I didn't want to seem dumb. And so I felt like I spent like a year and a half doing almost nothing and just feeling completely lost. And, everyone was nice to me, but I didn't know how to ask for help and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I felt really unproductive, and I just felt really bad, right? Like it felt bad, not that I was being threatened to be fired or anything like that, but like I just felt like this isn't right. It feels bad when you're at a job and you don't know what to do and you don't know how to ask for help and you feel kind of guilty. Um, and I think that was my worst career moment. I actually like got out of it, frankly, by going to graduate school. Um, because I was like, all right, well, this is a sign that this isn't right for me. And I had been thinking about going to graduate school anyway. So, I applied to graduate school and ended up going. But it was a really tough moment for me because it really shook my like sureness that I belonged in that career path, because I felt like, wow, if I belonged as a software engineer, like I would have been able to do work in that environment. And that was, that was a very low moment, and it carried through graduate school a little bit because I also wasn't a great graduate student. I was a bit better graduate student than I was in that job at Microsoft. But like, I ultimately also realized that I didn't want to get a PhD, which is what I had gone in for. And so I almost left tech actually after that, but I decided that I really wanted to live in New York City and I didn't want to like go into debt for law school, which was sort of my other option for some reason at that time. So I ended up leaving after when I left graduate school with a master's degree and got another tech job because I was like, well, I want to live in New York. I don't want to go into debt. I spent all this time learning how to be a software engineer. I should give this one more shot. And that job turned out to be a great job. And I learned, I learned how to be a working software engineer really in that job because I had the right mentorship. I was just in the right environment for me to be productive. And that really turned my career around completely.
Yeah. That's very interesting to hear. I mean, I hadn't thought about that recently, but yes, that must be the case for what you experienced early on with Microsoft. For a lot of people who come out of college, that they go into an environment and within a team and are expected to be, interact and work with people, and it's effectively an alien environment for them. It's not probably something they haven't experienced very much of at all.
Yeah. And, I think some companies do a better job of this than others in terms of like they realize that folks straight out of college university don't necessarily have a ton of real life working experience even when they've had internships and other things like that. That's it's not quite the same. And so I think some companies I do think do a good job of you know making sure that their new hires they're getting mentors and they're getting put on projects that are really well scoped so that they can kind of ramp up and learn things. And but it certainly, like, even companies that do that I think pretty well, you still see these pockets of frankly new managers who themselves didn't need that when they came out of college. Like, I do think there are plenty of people in tech where for whatever reason they're just like they're just kind of good at like getting into a code base and like writing software. And they don't, maybe they I don't know, maybe they've just been programming forever, or I don't know, they know the language really well. I don't know what it is, right? But and so I think for folks who have never had the experience of needing help figuring out how to kind of get started in a code base, they don't often know how to ramp someone up and mentor them into that. And and then they often don't pay enough attention. And so I do still occasionally see that scenario happen where somebody straight out of college is struggling, and when you look into it, you see a combination of the person is afraid to ask questions. They don't want to ask for help because they well, who knows why, right? I don't want to try to read their minds, but they don't seem to be asking for help. And they're also not getting help because the people that are supposed to be paying attention to them aren't really checking in often enough. They aren't, they've forgotten that, a college grad is a very different person than someone with 5 years of work experience who kind of knows what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly right. Good. Okay. So moving away from your worst moment, can you tell us about your career highlight?
Wow. My career highlight. I mean, I certainly, one of the highlights of my career was becoming the CTO of Rent the Runway. And Rent the Runway is a startup here in New York City. I joined Rent the Runway as a director of engineering. Although I will admit I was a director of engineering with no direct reports. So they probably gave me a bit of an inflated title to convince me to join them. But I ended up very quickly sort of acquiring a team and being promoted. And so, really what happened was I had done a little bit of management in the job prior to Rent the Runway. But I had been mostly a hands-on engineer. And I had kind of gotten to a point in my career where I was like, okay, like I've built a lot of systems, I feel very confident as an engineer. And I think that the challenge is like I want to learn how to manage teams. I want to try managing teams because I want to see if I'm good at that. And I think that I could be good at that. And I think that my combination of technical skills and other skills could lead to a very fruitful career in leadership in that way. So, I go to Rent the Runway as a director and I start managing people. And about a year into my time there, the person who hired me, who was the SVP of engineering, leaves. And I basically raised my hand and said to the CEO, like, let me do it. Let me run the team. um, and of course, I didn't have any idea what I was doing. But I was very confident that I could do this job, that I could do it well. I was, I think I still believe that I was definitely the most qualified person on the team at that time to do the job. Um, and so they ended up letting me do it, promoting me to the VP of engineering and eventually to the SVP of engineering. But I really wanted to be the CTO. And so, I had done a lot of the steps necessary to become the CTO. I mean, CTO has no standard path. All kinds of CTO means different things at different companies, and different people, have different expectations. But my CEO, to make me the CTO, she said, "Okay, I want you to present to the board, and I want you to present the engineering strategy to the board." And so I was like, "All right." I'm like, I asked for help. I had a CTO coach at the time, and he was like, "Oh, no problem. Just sort of like talk about the teams that you've built, some of the stuff you built." And so I kind of put this together and I gave it to her, and she was like, "Absolutely not. This is not a strategy. This is not good enough." And she really kind of raked me over the coals to actually think about where should, the software and the engineering team go to best support this business. And so I had to write this strategy, and I had to, create it. I had to present it to the board. They, of course, frankly, approved my promotion because I think they didn't care about that at all. I think they cared about the fact that the team was doing well, delivering stuff. People weren't quitting all the time. Like, that's what the board cared about, right? I am grateful to Jen, the CEO, for putting me through that work, because I think that, in doing that, I really learned a lot about leadership and strategy that has been really valuable to me throughout the rest of my career. I do think that, that it's not the only important thing in leadership by any stretch of the imagination. But if you have a good sense of strategy, if you're able to like look at the business around you and the technology, and at least talk about how your technology can evolve to make that business grow and support the business as it grows, I do think that you then can present a very compelling vision to your engineers and to people you might want to hire, and frankly to the whole company. And I do think that like that kind of motivation is a really, I think it's a really like top tier skill to develop that, many people don't necessarily develop that skill maybe even ever in their career. And I'm really grateful to have gotten pushed to try to learn how to do that, because I think it's made me a much better leader.
Yeah, you must have learned a lot from that experience, I would have thought, in terms of sort of understanding how what you and your team were delivering supports maybe the business objectives, and therefore that strategy was bridging, presumably, from the technical side to the business development side.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, at my thesis then and now, it really is that, technology has to be ready to enable the many potential futures of a business. Businesses, particularly startups, can go in lots of different directions, right? As new opportunities kind of present themselves, as the, product side or the business side sees things that they're like, if we could act on that quickly, we could really grow this business. And in a technical business, right, acting on that quickly means, can we get the software together to do something with it, right? Often. And so, a lot of the challenge, I think, of being an engineering leader at a startup like that is, balancing, delivering exactly what needs to be delivered today with continuing to think about how your systems are evolving so that you can deliver those possible futures without hopefully having to, just completely tear everything down and build something new, right? You've got enough flexibility in your systems to support a lot of different ways that they could go without being so overly flexible that, it takes forever to add anything.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Camille, can you tell us what excites you about the future of the IT industry and careers in this industry?
I mean, when I decided to go get a computer science degree, quite a long time ago, um, it seemed, I used to say to people that I was doing it because you can be in any industry with this kind of degree, and I was like, that was sort of a lie because actually I was doing it because I actually liked computers and wanted to write code, but it's not always like people don't always like to hear that women like to write code. And they now maybe more back then it was a little more odd, frankly. But I do like I was right and probably more right than I thought. Right, you can do anything and be a software engineer if you have if you have a technical background, right? If you have an IT background, you can go into any industry you want to go into, right? If you're in, I mean, look, I've worked in finance quite a bit. I've worked in tech, but I worked in fashion, right? I worked in fashion and fashion retail when I worked at Rent the Runway, and that was super fun. And I didn't have to go to fashion school or be an expert in that, but I got to be a part of it. And I got to be a part of it, because frankly of my technical skills. And I do think that it's really exciting to realize as an engineer that like, yeah, you can make a lot of money. And I do think like these skills are very valuable, and I believe they will continue to be very valuable. But it's also cool to realize that like, if you're passionate about fashion or media or nonprofits or like the future of energy or whatever, there's just so you can do anything. You can take those skills that you have and then work in whatever industry you're actually like you're interested in that business and have an impact on it. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's certainly the case, isn't it, that skills within this particular sector are so transferable. They make you an asset in different sectors. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Okay, we're going to go into the reveal round now. We're going to find out a little bit more about you and the way you think. Are you ready for this?
absolutely.
So, what first attracted you to a career in IT?
I mean, like I said, I really do like computers. I've been I'm into computers. I will also say that when I was trying to decide what to major in college, my grandmother used to read the U.S. News and World Reports, like that magazine. They rank colleges, but they also talk about like the future of careers and jobs. And she said, look, like you can do lots of things, but you seem to like computers and you like money. And this industry is going to be a good place to get a job. So maybe you should do this computer science thing,
Yeah.
which was good advice.
Going on to the next question, actually relevant. What is the best career advice you've ever received?
I mean, look, I think this is a bit of a cliche, but I do think it's true. Like, look, you're going to be happiest when you work with people and in a culture that you like. And you know, everybody has different things that they value more, and some people value money above all others and they'll just do whatever, that pays well. Some people value, interesting work, or they value, people value different kinds of things. But I genuinely think that, the times I've been happiest in my career and the best advice when I followed this advice, I've done the best is when I've been surrounded by people that I genuinely like and admire, and in a culture where I feel, you know, excited about going into work most days. I mean, obviously everybody has their down days. So I think that's probably the best advice I've ever received.
Okay. And conversely, what's the worst career advice you've ever received?
I mean, I think the worst some of the worst advice I've ever received has been really just from people who like I think don't um like just don't really understand the things that they're giving advice on. Like I've definitely had people say like, "Oh, you should, never get hands off. Like never stop writing code because then you'll become out of touch and, unhireable." And I think that if I had followed that advice, I would be stuck as a line manager or middle manager. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. If you love writing code, actually, like line management is kind of a great job for someone who wants, wants a certain kind of leadership and cares about their team, but also just really wants to be very, very technical and like sort of in the details of some kind of system. Like, actually, it's a great job. But I don't think that I would have been happy with that kind of career path. And I do think that for me, getting comfortable with not having to be in every detail of every system and not having, and just, getting comfortable with the fact that, like, look, I don't write code for a living anymore. And that's okay. I do think has allowed me to grow a bigger career than I otherwise would have.
Yeah, and that does make sense. I think, yeah, you're right. There are. It depends, doesn't it? Really, it's up to you what you want your career to be, and therefore the direction that you take and what you decide you want to focus on is down to you. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to, as you say, focus specifically on being a continual coder. It just depends on where you see your career going. So, if you were to begin your career again in today's world, what would you do?
Um, if I had to begin my career again, I mean, I do think that I would look for a first job straight out of school that I would ask a lot more questions about how they made their college hires successful. And I would definitely make sure that I was going into a place like I would try to make sure that I was going into a place where I was gonna be able to, like, learn, but also, be coached and mentored and taught. Um, and I would be a lot less afraid of asking questions. I do think that that really held me back for the first little bit of my career. And like what I would do in terms of like what company I would work for, like I don't know. I still like, distributed systems and platforms, and I'm glad that I have done that. I've like, I don't have any personal interest in like AI. I feel guilty even saying that on a recording, but like I just like I don't, like I don't want to be a mobile developer. I don't want to be a web developer. I don't really, I don't want to do AI. Like I really do like what I do when it comes to like, systems and platforms is really what I'm super interested in. And so I think I would do all of that stuff still, but just be a lot more careful about like trying to find places where I really felt like I was going to be given kind of the coaching that I needed to get out of my shell and be more successful.
Yes. And what career objectives are you currently focusing on?
Oh, I think the eternal career objective for senior management, at least if you have my personality, is just being a little bit more zen.
Right?
And look, I care very much about being the best leader that I can be. I want my teams and my peers and my, like I want to do good things for the people around me. Um and but I sometimes am quite intense. And so I think for me it's a matter of constantly, figuring out how can I relax, how can I, be more curious in my responses to things rather than, sometimes being judgmental. How do I keep open-minded and keep being open-minded, keep learning? That's not exactly. I mean, look, that's the thing for me, and maybe the thing for me for the rest of my life. Really, is just like constantly becoming a little bit of a better person every day, because I do think that that's the most important thing for me as a leader. And I don't. I've been a CTO at this point, and I've made plenty of money, and money is not the thing that like is the number one thing that drives me. And so it's not like I want to become the CTO of a massive tech company, or I don't have like major I don't want to like I don't feel obligated to keep climbing the ladder in any particular way. So it's much more about, am I doing good work with good people? Am I challenging myself? And am I finding opportunities to help companies be better companies and do better work, and deliver more to the world in a positive way.
Yeah. And what's the number one non-technical skill that has helped you in your career so far?
I mean, I have an English minor in college, and I'm a very good. I'm a terrible creative writer, but I'm a very good, not even technical writer, but like not, I'm good at writing and explaining things very clearly. And I think and I think that it's not even exactly a non-technical skill. I think it's very much in that like sort of gray area of technical, non-technical, um, because I do think that like it's the exact same skill that makes me good at debugging consensus systems, for example, which is an extremely technical technical application, but it's very much the ability to really boil a logical problem down and then explain it in plain English to people. I think that is just a hugely valuable skill. Anyone who wants to go into any kind of leadership position, the better you can get at sort of explaining yourself and writing down things in simple words. You don't have to you don't have to be like a big, fancy writer or like super entertaining. It's just that clarity, I think, is like such a critical skill.
Yes, definitely so. And what do you do to keep your own career energized?
I mean, I just sort of am constantly I'm constantly interested in thinking about why things are the way they are. And so I'm all like I have a really wide network that of, friends who are, anything from like, individual contributors that are early in their career to like, other kind of senior leaders at big companies. And I think the thing that I do to keep my career energized is really I'm so curious and interested in how companies and technical processes and technical practices and architectures come to be the way they are, and like why is that? Why is it hard for individual contributors to keep getting promoted and easy for managers to keep getting promoted? Like, what's that about? Nobody wants it to be that way. And yet it seems to be that way in lots and lots of companies. So why is that? Why does something that works really well at Google why is it such a disaster when applied to a different company? And I think for me, like, I'm just like, I could think the thing that keeps my career energized, honestly, is just I'm so interested and curious about why things are different and like the nuances of those differences and learning about the nuances of differences. And like, I like to make mental models and then see how they fall apart. And I think that's the thing that just keeps me energized. And it applies to all kinds of things, but I really heavily apply it to people and processes and technology. And that is really engaging for me.
Yeah. Okay. And what do you do in your spare time away from technology?
Not much these days because we're in the middle of a pandemic. No, I mean, I have
True.
I have 2 kids, that I spend some time with, but I'm not the most engaged parent, I must admit. I read a lot. I read both, like, I would say, like, maybe 15 to 20% of my time I read, like, business and related content, and then 80% of the time I read fiction. I read a lot of fiction. Um, you know, I when we're not in a pandemic, I like to lift weights at the gym. I love to travel. So, I think I'm a pretty, I live in New York City and I love living in New York City and I love everything about New York City. So I am a New Yorker in my spare time.
Right. Okay. And Camille, can you share with us a parting piece of career advice?
um, Let me think. So, look, I think that my parting piece of career advice would be, you know, that if you first of all, like, figuring out what makes you happy is a really hard thing to do, but try to always remind yourself that, like, I it's very reasonable to have a goal, that is like you feel like you live a well-balanced and contented life. And that doesn't mean that every second you are going to be happy. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to work hard to get to that well-balanced and contented life, because you will. But, I do think that the people that I see who I think are that are in the, look, I'm really in the middle of my career. I've been working for about 20 years. I've hopefully got at least 20 years to go. But the people I see when I look around in the middle of my career, who are, I think, in the best position, are not necessarily the ones who are, who have climbed the ladder the most successfully, but they're the ones who have figured out, a way to keep learning and stay positive, um, and, optimize, not, they haven't over optimized for any one thing, except, they don't seem to have over optimized for money. Like, I definitely know people who have been really heavily driven by money. I know people who made a lot of money very early in their career, and, they are no happier than the people I know who are still working, 9 to 5, right? So, like, you're unlikely to buy your way out of happiness past a certain point. You're unlikely to promote your way out of into happiness, right? You're unlikely the people that I know that are in senior positions are just as stressed out and often way more miserable than the people I know who aren't. So, my advice is really like, look, like, relax a little bit. Challenge yourself, keep challenging yourself to learn, and, find companies that you're proud of working for, find people that you like working with. Don't get yourself sold short, right? You want to get paid fairly, you want to be treated fairly. But anytime you feel resentment creeping in to your life, to your job, to any of your relationships, frankly, like, that is a sign that something really needs to change quickly, because resentment and burnout, that they are really hard to recover from. And I think they are, you don't want to shorten your career because you let yourself get totally burned out and totally bitter. Like, that's a terrible way to go. So, take care of yourself, right? Take care of yourself, and just, be careful about over optimizing for something that you think will make you happy, without checking in regularly about whether it is making you happy or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And Camille, can you tell us how we can find out more about you and connect with you?
Sure. Well, I tweet a lot. My Twitter handle is at SKAMILLE, Scamille. Now, some of your followers may love my tweets and some of them may hate them, and that's fine. I'm very
Okay.
much a I'm very much a full person on Twitter. I definitely do not just tweet about tech stuff or whatever. So, caveat emptor there. I blog quite often. You can find me. I just have a elidedbranches.com as my website, but I often post everything on Medium, where my handle is the same as my Twitter handle. And so, if you're mostly just interested in my long form thoughts on engineering, technical product, engineering management, that's the way to follow me.
Great. Okay. So, Camille, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Camille Fournier as much as I did. If you head over to the IT Career Energizer website, you can visit the show notes page to this episode, where there are links to Camille's 2 books, her blog, and to her social media profiles. And please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to make sure that you get episodes automatically downloaded every week. And reach out to me on social media, and in particular Clubhouse. It's always great to speak to and connect with listeners. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the IT Career Energizer podcast. To find out more about building a successful career in IT, visit itcareerenergizer.com.